I'm here today with Gareth Higgins. Gareth has been involved in peace building and violence reduction in Northern Ireland and now lives in the U.S. He's the author of How Not to Be Afraid, 7 Ways to Live When Everything Seems Terrifying, and helped found Wild Goose, New Story, and Movies and Meaning festivals. He also founded The Porch magazine. You can learn more about Gareth at garethhiggins.net. So Gareth, thanks so much for joining us and contributing to this project. I really am glad that you're part of it.
I'm glad to do it. It's a great project.
Well, thank you. And one of the things that I just have to ask you about, because it's clear from your background and mine that we're both what I would call startup people. I mean, we just love launching new initiatives and the kinds of things that people haven't done before. So what's your perspective on that and what drives you to do that?
Well, I don't want to work for anybody else. So.
That's one big motivation, isn't it?
That's one big motivation. I do like working with other people, and that's in alignment with why I do it. It's not the primary motivator. I think that there's a visionary consciousness that got awakened in me through being mentored as a teenager by peace activists in Northern Ireland, and specifically by the sociology professor, who's not often thought of as a sociology professor, and American Baptist minister and social justice activist, widely known, you know him, of course, Tony Campolo, who came into my life when I was 18 years old. I heard him speak at a conference just outside Dublin, and that's 29 years ago. And I was utterly captivated by the vision of this man who basically said, you can do something meaningful with your life. that part of that meaning is wrapped up in helping making the world better for and with others. And he had a way of making hard work sound like paradise or sound exciting. You know, he was inviting, I mean, in my case specifically, I went to volunteer for a summer in Camden, New Jersey, with a ministry that works with kids from economically disenfranchised backgrounds. And I didn't know anything about anything, at this stage. And I'm pretty sure that first summer that I was there, 99% of what happened to me was that I received a gift. I learned something. I may have done a few things that might have helped with the summer program that we were doing, but for the most part, I was being changed. And in fact, the director of that ministry, a man called Bruce Main, said to me subsequently that he felt that the summer program here was a place for college students, middle-class college students, to come and get healed and to come and get woken up.
Wow.
And awakened to need and to the possibility of meaning through service. And that is what happened to me. I got some healing. I got woken up. I'm not sure I did much that was useful to the ministry, but they had a year-round program that was there to kind of, work year-round. And there are kids who joined that ministry when they were 5 years old, who are now in their mid-30s and who are still connected to the community because the folks there have been with them every stage and with their families every stage to help provide what society hasn't provided. Cohesion, support them with their education, a sense of community, being there when there's trouble, caring for people when they fall through the cracks, and telling other people you can have a meaningful life too. And so I would say the kind of visionary consciousness of Tony Campolo, which to me is the best of a certain kind of U.S. American charisma, right?
Interesting.
You can do something and we can make it happen and it'll be good. There's that. And then Northern Ireland, which I spell with a small n in the Northern as a way of saying, our community disagrees over what the place should even be called. So I have this third name for it, which is Northern Ireland with a small n, as a way of saying maybe we don't have to agree on what it's called. But I was around peace activists. I was around religious leaders who were sacrificing for the sake of peace, who were putting themselves on the line, who were going to meet with people who might have been involved in perpetuating violence, who were willing to stand up for what was right and also be involved in dialogue with their political opponents and people who might even have been dangerous. And because Northern Ireland is such a small place, you can drive across it in 2 hours. There's a sense in which, the parameters of the space that we're trying to change, those actually that is a space that's changeable. It's very hard to imagine how you change the world. People always talk about changing the world, or even changing the United States. It's just so ungraspably large. And sometimes things can happen that change larger spaces. But to grow up where I grew up, it was easier to be motivated by other visionary consciousness and think, we can do something for Belfast, and so I think it comes partly from that, and it comes from having parents who suffered a lot in the conflict in Northern Ireland, suffered greatly, and they would never say that they suffered greatly. A lot of people where I come from will say, well, I didn't have it too bad. And, that can be true, but you can still have it bad, even though it's not as bad as some other people have experienced. And they, for whatever reason, their pain did not turn into a victim mentality. Their pain did not become bitterness. Their pain became, try to do something better than we've been able to do. They were the kind of classic, they still are to this day, the classic parent who says, I didn't get the chance to do this when I was young, so I want to give you the chance. Or even, I don't quite understand what it is you do, Gareth, but we believe in you, So while it's there was a lot of suffering in my family, and a lot of it had to do with the conflict in Northern Ireland, I feel blessed and grateful that I had mentors like Tony Campolo, mentors like the peace builders in Northern Ireland who didn't have a public profile, and then my parents supporting me every step of the way.
So, in introduction, I just kind of really briefly touched on some of the different things that you've done. I'd really love for you to give folks a little bit, deeper flavor of those, because you've got such a great, varied and, to my mind, accomplished, background. And I'd love for folks that aren't as familiar with you to know more about that.
Well, it's, thank you for the question. And it's always it's a weird question for me to answer, because I think everyone has accomplishments and variety in their lives, and some people's, the stuff that you end up doing gets noticed more than others.
Sure.
And I want to be really careful, because there's nothing special about doing what you're called to do. And if you're called to do things that are quiet and unseen, or if you're called to do things that are noisy and seen, what matters is, do you seek to do them with integrity and the purpose being the common good, rather than selfish ambition or selfish ego? And you can step into a really quiet, hidden life from selfish, egotistical motivation, just like you can step into a life that, wins Pulitzer Prizes or Nobel Peace Prizes and do it with humility. Now, I am neither of those people, right? I'm not going to win a Pulitzer Prize, and I don't have some of the stuff I'm involved in necessarily involves bringing people together, sometimes in quite large spaces, but it isn't about me, right? It's about all of us together finding the place where, as a number of people have said, Howard Thurman has a variation on this, Frederick Buechner, as you know, has a strong variation on this. Maya Angelou, most recently, I heard from someone quoting Maya Angelou saying, do the best that you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better. So don't judge yourself didn't know. And both Buechner and Thurman have this lovely formula around, you'll find your calling in the place where the needs of the world meet your great passion. And don't ask don't ask, first of all, what the world needs, but ask what brings you alive, because what the world needs generally is people who are fully alive. Now, Thurman is often misquoted as saying, I think it was Thurman that said this, people misquote Thurman saying, don't ask what the world needs, just ask what brings you alive. But actually what Thurman said was, don't only ask what the world needs. Mm-hmm. You do need to ask what the world needs. But also the place where you're going to help meet that need is the place where you come most alive.
Sure, sure.
And the world needs some noisy people and lots of quiet people. And us noisier people really need to not get ahead of ourselves and think that we're more important because we make more noise. In fact, we need to take more responsibility for the noise we make.
Absolutely.
Because the noise can influence people and stories can influence people for good or ill. So what I love is gathering people together in groups in order to discover more about themselves and how they can come more alive. So, it came from other people gathered me into a group, and I discovered things that made me more alive. I love festivals. I love the idea that in the pre-industrial societies, people lived in villages where they knew very few people most of the year. But every season, there would be a village meeting another village, meeting another village. Maybe a dozen villages would come together and have a festival. They'd have a harvest festival. They'd have a winter solstice festival. They'd have a summer solstice festival. They would bring the things they had grown or made, and they would trade those things with each other. And they would meet their old friends who they only saw 4 times a year. I don't know about you, but even in the city where I live, there's some friends who I don't see 4 times a year. And I started going to a festival in England called Greenbelt that just woke me up to, when you gather lots of people together, you can learn a lot. And you can obviously pool more resources to do a lot. And I got involved in the Wild Goose Festival partly because of my experience with Greenbelt that started in the late 90s. There were people from the US who had gone over to Greenbelt in England many times. They wanted to do something like that in the US. And the point of that was to bring people whose spirituality was animated by the progressive Christian tradition, although it would be open to everybody and people from other faiths, but it would be a primarily progressive Christian festival, and who were then led into acts of service to the common good and creativity. And we started that in 2012. It's still going today. And that's a festival that several thousand people come to. I've been involved in starting festivals that are more for about 200 people. This is kind of a secret, so don't tell anyone. I like the 200 to 300 person festival most of all. Because you could, for obvious reasons, you get more connection with more people. And then I love retreats of 30 people and fewer. And we sort of fell into this thing that has now become, with my partner in life and work, another Brian Ammons, we lead retreats in Ireland where we bring people mostly from the US to have an experience of, sometimes we call it peacemaking inside and out. So we have this experience that's sort of transformative on the inside around contemplation and being in the Irish landscape and connecting with art and other people. And then there's the external journey of learning about the specifics or some of the specifics of what we call the peace process in Northern Ireland, where people who used to support violence against each other and then people who just were implacably opposed to each other's politics came together and through a negotiated process agreed a treaty and a set of structures in which we are transforming our relationships as a community into less separation, more collaboration. We still disagree with each other, but we're not advocating violence against each other. There is drastically less violence than there used to be. There's still some great suffering. But there is much more of an understanding that we are seeking to serve the entire community. And we are seeking to heal the wounds of the past. And every now and again, there's even a bit of light for the idea that maybe each of us has a responsibility to look at where we might have been complicit in wrongs in our society. And those wrongs can be stated in a very complex way or in a potentially oversimplified way, which I'm going to do now, which is if anybody does not have an equitable stake in the society, the people who are withholding that equitable stake or passively allowing that inequitable stake to exist have a responsibility to do what they can from their resources to meet the needs of people who have less than they should. And that, I think, is a universal. And the universal can be stated as bring what you have and ask for what you need. And some of us have lots of resources and some of us have fewer resources when it comes to tangible physical things like money, quote unquote, property things. I think all of us have gifts that are not tangible necessarily, but our society obviously values certain kinds of resources more than others. And when we look at that and see that something then ends up being that unfairness results or suffering results where some people don't have what they need, even their basic necessities, those of us who have resources, it's not rocket science. It's our job to share those resources. Even if we think we earned those resources, which we didn't, we inherit. I mean, everybody starts from a place that they inherited. And so we inherited our lack as well. And even the wealthiest, most powerful person on the planet has some lack that needs to be met by the community. And even the person living in the most profound poverty has some gift that maybe, I don't know, like rubbing the lamp that the genie comes out of. Some of the rest of us need to be supporting those who are struggling just to get by without basic necessities, to have the space just to breathe enough to let their gift shine. And I tell stories and get to write things, and sometimes people package those writings and edit them and try not to get too frustrated with me in guiding me in how to turn them into things that we call books. But I'm not really even sold on the concept of a book. I think the very idea of book is transforming in the moment that we're living in this project that I've collaborated or I've contributed to that you've edited is one example. I'm very interested in the written word, and I'm interested in the spoken word, and I'm interested in it being shared with people in ways that are life-giving. And sometimes that's a 6-word long short story. And sometimes that's a mammoth encyclopedia that can only fit on the internet. So.
Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to get you involved in this project was because of, not only the kind of the peace building work that you've done, but also that it was from the perspective of, both understanding the Northern Ireland situation and the United States situation.
Yeah. And
so what are the kinds of things that we folks that haven't gone through the Northern Ireland, situation need to learn?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So it's spoken from the place of, I deeply value the gifts that have emerged in the US. And I've already mentioned, that Tony Campolo as being the perfect example. There's something that needs to be done. Let's do it. We can do it. There's a shadow side to that, which is let's invade Iraq. We can do it. And so you have to subject your vision to accountability and discernment to people wiser than you, right? Like wise people would not have invaded Iraq. And those wisdom traditions go back further than yesterday, And I also think that the gaping wound in the United States of the genocide of the indigenous people upon whose backs what we call the nation was built, and the legacy of the treatment of the people who were brought here in chains. That those are the gaping wounds. And there seems to be this real fear and reluctance to face it.
Yeah, big time.
And I understand that fear and reluctance because all of us are afraid and reluctant to face even a mildly painful thing that we did to somebody else ourselves. It's hard to do that. It takes courage. But Germany continues to heal itself by remembering the Holocaust. And South Africa, in parts, continues to heal itself by remembering white South Africa, the awakened part of white South Africa, some of whom are some of the bravest people I know, remember their complicity in apartheid. And they know that it must be remembered, and it must be remembered in a whole way. Because if you know better, you should do better. That's all. It's not, if you know better, you should all punish yourselves for the rest of your lives. That's not it at all. It's, if you know better, if you know that your resources came from genocide or the torture of other human beings, even if it was a few generations back, you have some questions to ask. And there are people in Ireland who have some questions to ask. And part of the gift is lots of us actually have a much more complex background than we think. I am precisely 50% Indigenous Irish and 50% Protestant Northern Irish. And when I go back another generation, I'm 1/8 Polish Jew. My great grandmother with her family escaped Poland, escaped pogroms, was not, may well have been killed if they had stayed in Poland in the 1890s or thereabouts. And this is something that's only just come to light in our family because when they moved to England, they converted to Catholicism and hid their Jewishness in order to protect themselves from anti-Semitism.
Wow.
So, I can look back, I could probably trace back, and I may be able to find that there's some people in my lineage who were involved in perpetuating injustice, stealing land, killing people, moving them off the land in Ireland. And I'm absolutely certain, well, I shouldn't say absolutely certain, I'm very confident that I could go back and find that some of my lineage were the people whose land was stolen, or the people who were kicked off the land, the people who were harmed, the people who were killed. So I get to look at both the privilege and the lack, and what has happened in the last 25 years in the north of Ireland. And there's 1.7 million people in Northern Ireland, so you'd hear there's 1.7 million opinions. So mine's just one of those. What has happened is that we agreed that using violence to achieve an end to injustice on either side was not going to work. At least at the very base, pragmatically, it's not going to work. We can basically keep killing each other forever. Or one of us might win through the total destruction of the other side, and then you're going to be left with a scorched earth. Why would you want to live in it? And because of the aging leadership of the various political movements in Northern Ireland who got involved as young activists some even in their teens and early 20s in the 1970s, and now some of them are grandparents. And they were thinking, we didn't think it was going to take this long, and we don't want our children to go through this. And frankly, there were people behind the scenes saying, look, there's compromise available here. We can come up with a solution that isn't winner takes all. So when I think about the US, what I'd love to see happen is the visionary consciousness that I've already spoken about. The common good, the fact that there are people, whether they are on the political right or the political left, who care about doing things for others, who care about their communities. If that visionary consciousness could learn from places like Northern Ireland, where we have decided, if you're going to get some of what you want, you have to give up demanding all of what you want, and also demanding that the other side gets none of what they want. Right? And if you can sit quietly enough with people who are emotionally, psychologically mature enough to listen to each other, you will arrive at a set of common goals. You might not be able to agree about the big, hot button wedge issues, but you could agree about basic necessities for human beings. You could agree about caring for the most vulnerable in our society. And you could agree, for instance, none of us want to remain this divided and hating each other this much. You know, maybe you can agree on those three things. What we needed in Northern Ireland was a lot of behind the scenes dialogue. And so my hope is that there are a lot of people in the US who are talking quietly to each other, that there are people across the political spectrum talking to each other, and we actually need to give them space to do that. We need to not say you're a traitor because you tried to collaborate with the other political team.
Absolutely.
We need to encourage it to happen quietly. It often needs to happen privately. So that's one piece. President Mandela brought Northern Irish political leaders to South Africa for a secret retreat once. You know, the public didn't know about it. The press didn't know about it. And you can do things when you're basically in South Africa that you can't do when you're in Northern Ireland. You know, and I remember hearing one of these political leaders long after the fact saying that they had gone swimming at the beach one day, right? And these were people who wouldn't even be seen talking to each other in public back in Belfast, but they went swimming. And my memory is, I may be mistaken, my memory is that this politician said that when you're in your swimming trunks or in a bathing suit, it changes the way you relate to the person you're talking to, right?
Isn't that crazy?
Isn't it? So, you know,
but I believe it.
So there was a lot of dialogue going on behind the scenes. And then there were public incremental moves that were saying, the bottom line is we have to commit to not use violence, to not support the use of violence before we can talk to each other openly. And then, you know, all the parties did publicly. There were ceasefires and there was a public commitment to not use violence. There was disagreements over how much those were meant and whether they were permanent, but it was a start. And then we invited in independent support for the negotiations. They were chaired by a former US Senator, George Mitchell. They were co-chaired by the former Prime Minister of Finland, Harry Houkuri. They were co-chaired by the current president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, who had been a major figure in the ANC. And then there was a side process regarding the decommissioning of weapons held by paramilitary organizations that was chaired by a former Canadian general. So none of these people were Northern Irish or Irish. We brought in outsiders.
Great way to do it.
Who were able, and somebody mentioned in my hearing the concept of the sin eater, which is a concept in some religious traditions where there's a person, often an elder, whose job is to hold the space and take on all the murk and the shadow that there is in the room, so that the people in the room have the freedom. And then the elder needs to have a process where they clean themselves up afterwards, you know, but it's someone who can hold that space. And my feeling is that Senator George Mitchell was kind of like, he allowed himself to be the scapegoat for all the expression of rage and fear in the room, which bought him and earned him the credibility after 2 years of negotiations to say to the parties, I'm going home in 2 weeks and I'm not coming back. So there will be an agreement completed by the time I leave in 2 weeks. And he was off by 2 days. There was an agreement within 2 weeks and 2 days.
Wow.
Because he'd earned this respect. Because he'd shown them, look, I'm not partisan. I care about all of you. But we are going to come to an agreement here. And the agreement produced, I think it'd be wonderful if anyone in the US who cares about building bridges to look at Northern Ireland, and there's places like South Africa, Colombia, Sri Lanka, other places where conflict has been transformed or is still being transformed, to look at some of the structures we set up around, we no longer have a winner-takes-all electoral system. Basically, the system produces a first minister or a prime minister from the party that got the most votes. And then the party on the other side, it's oversimplified to put it this way, but if the Protestant party gets the most votes, they get to nominate the prime minister. And then the Catholic party that gets the second most votes, they get to nominate the deputy prime minister. So the prime minister and the deputy are from two opposing political sides, but they operate as one office. And the cabinet positions are distributed among the 5 political parties that get the most votes. So you induce collaboration. We reformed the police service in a way that many police officers feel was good. There was a painful part around changing the name of the police service and changing the insignia that police officers would wear on their uniform, because they felt this was about loyalty and dignity. And over 300 police officers had been murdered in the conflict. So it was very difficult for a lot of police officers to feel like they were scapegoated. But actually, the reform of the police has led to accountable policing that's accountable in both directions. So the police are accountable for mistakes that they make and can't be blamed for things that weren't their fault, right? And we have cross-community governing bodies for the police. We established a Human Rights Commission. We established an Equality Commission whose job is to guarantee or ensure the application of legislation whose aim is to prevent discrimination against people from historically marginalized groups. What was left out of our agreement is a meaningful, comprehensive way to tend to the needs of the victims and survivors of the conflict. We didn't know how to do that. It's still evolving. It's not there yet. And I have the greatest respect for people who suffered directly. And even from my own family who suffered in a way that people might not consider direct, but it did leave its legacy. It has created damage. And certainly the best response to that pain is to prevent the violence from happening again. And then the next thing is look after the needs of the widows and the widowers and the orphans and the people who are widowed, whose spouses are still alive.
Wow.
But effectively they were widowed. Of any gender, and the people who are orphaned whose parents are still alive, because the damage that was done basically sucked these people into darkness.
Wow.
And there's much more work to be done there. And thankfully there are some wonderful organizations working with victims and survivors. And there are places like the Caramila community, who many times, I mean, the Caramila community is this dispersed community that's actually has members in other parts of the world, but there is a physical location in a very beautiful place on the north coast of Ulster. And there were many occasions when both Caramila and some other reconciliation communities would get in touch with someone who had just been bereaved, through someone had just been murdered, and their surviving family members, they would receive a phone call to say, look, we're from this organization. You can come and stay with us for a while. And, we will be there in these immediate moments. So if there's one, I know I've spoken a lot, the passion I have is to support anything that helps us see life through each other's eyes and to prioritize the things that will promote the common good. And that includes the good not only of our people who are politically different, not only our political opponents, but people who we might even consider enemies. And an enemy, I think, is someone who means you harm. An opponent is someone who just opposes your politics. Most people who have a different political view to me, they're not my enemy. They're only my enemy if they mean me harm. And I want to learn to love my enemy. It doesn't mean I need to hang out with them. And it doesn't mean don't need to take steps to kind of be sure that I'm safe. But I want for their good too. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing all of your insights on this, Gareth. As I mentioned before, we've got a lot to learn, I think, from the experiences that, Northern Ireland has gone through and the other countries that you mentioned as well. I would like to just, take a quick side note, if we could. to talk about your work with one of our mutual friends, Kathleen Norris. What kinds of things have you been doing to collaborate with her recently?
Yeah. Well, I met Kathleen maybe 6 years ago, and I was familiar with her work and to a degree in Amazing Grace and the Cloister Walk particularly. And what I didn't know was that she is a massive cinema fan, and she loves the popcorn movies, and she loves the obscure Lithuanian documentaries about potatoes. And she has seen more films than most people I know. And we hit it off as mutual lovers of cinema. And so what we've been doing is we started a newsletter called Soul Telegram, which was a name I had used. I'd actually collaborated with another Kathleen Falsani, who's a wonderful writer.
Sure, yes.
And we'd done this thing that had been called Soul Telegram. That was a different thing, and I still had the website. I still had the URL soultelegram.com, and it felt like, we can use the same name for that because the other one had gone out of existence. And what it is an essay from each of us every 2 weeks about a movie, or sometimes Kathleen will write about all the movies she knows from Algeria, or profane movies that have something sacred to say. And so that you can find out about that at soultelegram.com. And we're working on something else that we're not talking about publicly just yet, but I'm very excited about it, and people will hear about it soon. I'm delighted to be doing it, to have a writer of Kathleen's quality and her mind and her joy at life. Actually, as you know from knowing her, Kathleen is a surprisingly raucous and loud presence in a room.
But she's incredibly brilliant too.
Oh, totally brilliant. And she's so thoughtful, and she wants to bring people's attention, like I do, to things that are off the beaten path, and to help people see life through the eyes of other people, and to help me see life through the eyes of other people. Something to go back to something you said earlier about why I'm uncomfortable talking about, what have you done? Because I want everybody to get to talk about what they've done. The point is, someone I knew would talk about his desire being to train people's fingers so that they can unpick the knots that they had been tied up in by bad religion.
That's pretty good.
And it was not that he wanted to unpick the knots for them. It was that he wanted to train them and give them the tools so they can unpick the knots, and then they could pass that on to somebody else. And yes, there's like I like going to concerts, and I'm not a musician, and sometimes I just want to go and be entertained and receive the gift that this person is giving. But the kind of work that you do, that I do, I think that Kathleen does, and other people that are in this sort of field, our job is to try to help other people learn tools that have fallen into our hands. And there are many, many tools I need to learn from other people myself. I have a friend who recently won an award for an amazing book, and I wrote to her to tell her how happy I was for her. She's someone who it's very easy to be happy for, and she's not looking for awards. She's just looking to do good, meaningful work. And the book that she wrote comes from a place of real pain, and it's an extraordinary book. And she said to me, I hope that this award can stimulate a rising tide that lifts all the boats of people whose work is about these things. I thought, wow, that's what I want all of us to be doing. Not looking for platform, not looking for ego, not looking for, it's nice for people to say thank you for your work, and I don't reject that. But those of us who do a bit of noisy work, the point is to stimulate a rising tide that lifts all the boats.
Absolutely.
And I have been when I step back and look at the people, some of them well-known, some of them you'll never hear of in public, who have made space for me, who've handed things to me, who've given me tools, who've said, come with me. That's why I don't feel that anybody earned the privileges that they have. You know, yes, there's hard work and all of that. I'm not so much speaking from the place of the inequitable distribution of wealth in society as I am about every one of us is the product of mentoring or the absence of mentoring. And if you haven't been mentored, I want you to find mentors. And I want to help you find mentors, because some of us weren't mentored, you know, some of us didn't have that yet, or we were mentored poorly. The point is not so that you can mentor someone into being famous or powerful, but so that we can mentor each other into having the tools we need to live better, to serve the common good, to be happy with what we have, and where we have a lack that's a problem, be connected with people who we can say, hey, can you help me with this? You know, stimulate a rising tide that lifts all boats. And that quote, I'm not naming this writer because she didn't make this statement publicly, but I will ask her for her consent to name this, because I'd love to tell you more about the book. But I suppose if you were to Google Northern Irish writer who just won a major poetry award,
maybe we can figure it out, huh?
I want you to find the book, and it's just because she didn't make this statement publicly, because I think she's, you know, her humility would prevent it. But I think it's a magnificent statement. I hope that any of us that our work would stimulate a rising tide that lifts all boats. Yeah. That belongs on a wall with Thurman's quote and Buechner's quote.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Gareth, thanks so much for, you know, spending some time with us and for contributing to this project. I'm really glad that you have, and I really hope that people will be inspired by, you know, this conversation to read more of your work, and, you know, to read How to Heal Our Divides and your chapter in it. And let's continue the conversation.
It's lovely being with you, Brian. Thank you for the questions. Just for anyone else who's interested in coming to Ireland, we do these cool things in Ireland, and you can find out about them at irelandretreats.net. But whether you come to Ireland or not, like whatever boat you're in, let's rise the tide together.
Amen. Well, thanks again, Gareth.
Thank you.